Welcome to the Warehouse. Has a Sunday sermon ever left you running to Google with new theological questions? Have you ever wished you could peer behind the curtain and see how a message comes together? That's where we come in. Here at Cornerstone Church, we spend hours every week talking about Scripture. This is the place to learn about passages, dive into their context, and study the Bible's cultural background. Come to the Warehouse, where we extend what you learn from the stage.
What's up, everybody?
Hey,
Wow, that was really exciting.
Yeah,
That's nice.
It was nice.
I'm gonna turn on a radio voice.
That's what you did.
Okay, so this is the Warehouse,
Yeah,
and
it
we're
is.
here,
In the
all of
warehouse.
us.
All of us.
Last week we weren't.
No, I was out. I was
You
on
were
vacation,
gone.
and you guys covered it without me.
Yeah,
We did.
I'm
I think we did
assuming
pretty.
you did a wonderful job.
We did
Yeah,
pretty well.
we did.
I think.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, I
Thanks.
believe it. There's not a
Thanks.
doubt in my mind. But if they didn't do amazing, just email me, inrolls@cornerstone.team. You don't have to send it to the warehouse one. I don't want to hurt their feelings.
Yeah, keep it private. Honestly, I agree. Send it to Nathan.
Yeah, please do. I can't handle it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I've got the question today.
Yeah, you
Yeah, he
did.
does.
Okay. What smell, image, or sound triggers nostalgia for you?
You go first.
I would say smell for me is probably honeysuckle. I've always loved the smell of honeysuckle, and there are particular places and memories it takes me back to. But one would be my grandparents' house that is now my parents' house. Whenever my grandparents moved out of it, my parents bought it, and there's a honeysuckle patch that I remember going over to frequently. And you do the thing where you pull the stem
Yep.
out and you can get a single drop of nectar, but
Yeah.
it seems like the coolest thing in the
Yeah.
world. I just loved it. And then somebody told me that honeysuckle's an invasive species and you're supposed to try to get rid of it. But I'm I love the smell of it so much.
But it smells so good.
So honeysuckle would be one for me.
Mine. So I don't know how to put a smell to the smell that I smell. So that's where we're starting off first. Okay. But my family is from Mount Carmel, Illinois, and there's a power plant there. So whenever you come into Mount Carmel, you smell it.
Is it
And I'm well,
Sulfury.
maybe. Oh, and they also have oil. Or no, what are they called?
Oil rigs.
Yes,
Okay.
all the time. And so there's just a smell that I just always this is Mount Carmel.
Okay. And you smell it other places and it reminds you of that too?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to think of an image or a sound, but I don't think I have anything per se. Smell seems to be the one that isn't there something they say that smells are
Yes.
they trigger memories
Yeah,
and
yeah,
they're they're intertwined somehow.
Definitely some perfumes out there. You can be like, what is that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, mine's asphalt. It just got freshly laid. My grandpa, he owned Jack's Asphalt in Mount Vernon. They did a lot of work, and he owned it for a really long time, and his dad owned it before him. And it was right next to the baseball field that I played at in grade school. So when I smell a freshly asphalted parking lot or something, it always takes me back to 8th grade baseball or, hanging out at grandpa's shop.
That's cool.
Yeah.
It's really sweet.
Oh yeah. As you said that, it's my grandparents on my mom's side, they worked at a garage. They were my grandpa was the manager and my grandma did secretary stuff there. And so walking in and smelling anytime I walk into a garage and smell oil and everything that's happening in there. Anyway. Yeah, I was going to comment on, but you already did. I was going to comment on the fact that I was curious whether we all picked smells.
Yeah.
Because there are 3 options, but your sense of smell is your olfactory nerves are most tightly tied to memory.
Yeah.
Smells are more likely to trigger a memory than sights.
That's
or
cool.
Sounds. Anyway, just interesting.
Fun facts. To you, Nathan. Introduction for the week.
Let's talk about the Bible. Invite week 2. So
Nope.
what?
Week 3.
Oh, I titled it wrong because I missed week 2. That's right.
It's week 3.
That's my fault.
Golly.
I changed the title.
Thank you.
Invite week 3.
Hey.
First try. Now we are looking at Luke 14, 25 through 33. This is a week that we have Nick Volkening preaching with us. Again, I love that guy and I'm excited to hear him teach about this text. We've been in Luke a lot. We were commenting on that.
Yeah.
This one's a really interesting passage to have in the section on invite. I think invite, like the main thing we're focused on in this relational skill of inviting and the way we interact with others. It's like, how do we invite someone to take a next step in following Jesus? And that might be evangelism. Might be part of like just their ongoing walk, encouraging them to come to a small group or like to take one next step in following Jesus. But this one is a really interesting passage to put in this study. And I love that we did it because sometimes we, I guess we'll get there. I'm not going to spoil the fun. So Luke 14, 25 through 33. What were some big ideas for you guys? You guys both had solid ones.
Mine was being a disciple is to not deny yourself.
Is to deny yourself, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Sound like there might have been a not in there to not deny yourself.
Yeah.
I'm like,
And
That's wrong.
You didn't get it.
how about for you, Morgan?
And following Jesus takes perseverance and sacrifice.
Love it. Mine was just following Jesus is incredibly costly. So
Good job,
very
guys.
much in the same vein. Hey, we've been in Luke a lot recently. What are some like high points of context for you guys as we're going into this text?
So this is considered like a research gospel. Luke was not an eyewitness to the
Events.
events that take place here, but he did a lot of research to get to this. He's a close companion of Paul. He's a physician. The longest book in the New Testament. I don't think we've said that one yet. I thought that was
I
kind of
don't
neat.
think I knew that.
I didn't know that either. Nick actually pointed that out
I haven't
yesterday.
double checked.
Yeah.
Did you double check
I
it?
said I haven't.
Oh, man.
So I
You
wouldn't
double-
run with it yet.
Oh,
Nick is good people.
Probably worth
but-
Google.
are we asking Google?
Okay, Luke is the longest of the four Gospels
Whoa,
and the longest book in the New Testament.
man. He was right. Oh, that
Fun.
guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else?
Me saying that Nick is just good people. He may not know everything. Sorry.
Nick is good people and he may know
Yes,
everything.
and he actually might know everything. I don't really think I do have much to add. I think you hit a lot of the high level stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, he writes. So I'm thinking about like he's writing to Theophilus, a wealthy benefactor who has heard things about Jesus and wants to know for sure if they're
Yep.
true. And I think with that, I think Luke has a kind of interesting focus on like some of these passages about the cost of discipleship with like the rich young ruler. And here, like there's a lot of mention about like what it costs, which I think is, that might be influenced some by his audience, right into a Gentile crowd who's and a wealthy guy saying like, hey, what's it take to follow Jesus?
Yep. And you also see a lot of focus from Luke about concern for the poor in his gospel. So I think that's good points
too.
right to what you're saying, that who he's writing to probably has a lot to do with some of the verbiage and the way that he interacts with, where the Beatitudes say, blessed are those who are poor in Luke's gospel.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's cool. That's cool.
So I have one point for immediate context is that he's on a journey to Jerusalem, not Luke, but Jesus and his followers.
Which that's kind of isn't that a recurring theme in Luke, right? Like Jesus didn't do something because it was not yet his time.
Right.
But then like he says that he turned his face toward Jerusalem, which signifies like kind of the intensification of his persecution and like everything from that point on. It's like, it gets more intense.
Yeah. Like he's on his way to go be crucified now. And that's,
Whoa.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Morgan, you want to read for us?
I would love to.
Aw.
All right. What do you want to go through? 25
through 27, I think.
Perfect. Now great crowds accompanied him, and he turned and said to them, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple.
Yeah.
Just hearing that, like at first, like the punch in the face that would have caused.
Yeah. This is one of those passages that, like, as we talked about, it's like, man, there's not a whole lot of pieces of it that seem difficult to interpret.
Right.
There's but it's very difficult to follow.
Yes.
Yeah, because there's this huge, so first let's talk about like the great crowds that are following him. One, not everybody who is in the crowd is a believer. And these are people following him, and who want to know what he is saying. Right. So, but.
Yeah. So there are people that are interested in Jesus.
Right.
Yep.
They're not just like, he didn't just walk into the middle of a crowd and say this. They're people who are following him around because he gives teachings. So he's an itinerant preacher. He's walking around giving teachings. He's also an itinerant healer. Like people are coming to him with diseases and afflictions and demons and stuff, and he's casting them out. So a variety of reasons that people are surrounding Jesus. They might be wanting to hear, what's the rabbi have to say next? They might be wanting to see, like, who's he going to heal next?
Yeah,
or is he
going to
heal me?
Yeah.
And that's the crowd that he's turning to and saying this. And varying degrees of commitment to him.
Yeah, and then he turned and said to them, like, he's wanting to be crystal clear about what he's setting what he's setting up here is like, pay attention. This is a pretty big deal.
Not just kind of like mumbling under his breath,
Right.
and not just talking to his disciples. But he's like, hey, we're going to go ahead and stop. Talk about this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the most challenging pieces of this is just that, like, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, and yes, even his own life, it's like that word hate is so strong.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, whenever we look at it, just as far as like what the word means, it consistently means like hate.
Yeah.
It's not like other places in scripture and like Bible dictionaries, lexicons and stuff. It's like, it means hate.
Yeah,
Or
the
just
actual
to despise.
right. Yes. Yeah, the actual definition is that word. There's nothing that ever pulls the punch from it. You don't see it anywhere where they're like, oh, it actually means this time. It's like, no, it means to despise, to hate.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not like, in its literal sense, it does not mean just like to prefer or to deprioritize or whatever. So that's challenging, and that's like what Jesus said. And so then whenever we start comparing it with other passages of scripture,
Right.
too,
That's what I was thinking.
like we start saying like, okay, so Jesus is using strong wording here, but it can't mean that a husband should literally hate and despise his wife.
Right.
Right. Like that's going against Ephesians 5.
Yeah.
Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. It can't be despise or hate your children.
Right.
Because it's like, fathers, do not exasperate your children. So it can't mean that.
Right. Yeah, Jesus would never say something and it literally mean something that contradicts.
Right.
His word. Yeah.
Yeah, his word.
Right.
Yeah.
So then we have to start saying like, okay, so what is it that he's trying to get at here? He's not speaking exactly literally here. Then he's using it in an idiomatic or hyperbolic kind of way, right?
Yeah.
In the same way he would say like, hey, cut off your arm if it causes you to sin. It's like, don't literally cut off your arm, but you should be willing to do that. Don't literally like hate your father and mother, but like if it came to that, if you had to choose between loving Jesus or loving your family, like you have to love Jesus.
Yeah.
Is that how you guys kind of think of it?
Yeah, I think so too. And you made a really good point yesterday of like, we can't sugarcoat it or take away from it and try and pull the punch from what it's saying, because that is what it says. And when we do that, we're almost trying to, we're almost going against what he's saying right here of when we talk about evangelism, is we're like pulling back and like trying to make it that gospel light. And I think you're right on with, it means what it says. It maybe don't, like you said, we're not supposed to actually hate them, but as we get into it, when you add up the cost, like if that's what it takes to follow Jesus, then yeah.
And I just wonder, it makes me wonder, like, if we pull back too much on that word, like it seems like you could go in either ditch, right? You could say either literally, I need to hate my family, and that's like not biblical.
Yeah.
But also if we just say like, if we lighten it up too much, it can remove some of the offense of the gospel that Jesus was like trying to put there.
Yeah.
Similar to whenever he says, like, hey, you got to eat my flesh and drink my blood if you're going to follow me. and people are like, hang on, I didn't sign up for this. And they're leaving him over that. And then Peter says, like, where else could we go? Like, you alone have the words of life.
Yeah.
So anyway, just a thought as we're interpreting that word. It's kind of a weird one to try to figure out what to do with.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the whole like cutting off your arm part too. Like, it's not literally cutting off your arm, but if it's for the sake of the gospel, is that what you're willing to do as well? I think that's a really good point to point out. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, I think when it boils down to it, it really does mean that, like, okay, in comparison to how much I love and cherish Jesus, like my love for my family, like it pales in comparison so much that it could almost be characterized as hate.
Sure.
But I think if we go there too quickly and just skip over the word and just make it mean that, then it can just, it doesn't have the same kind of punch to just say, Jesus says, hey, if you don't love me more than you love your family.
Yeah.
It's like, it doesn't have the same kind
punchy.
of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, oh yeah, I love Jesus more than my family. Right. It's like, okay, what does that mean though?
But I love him in a way that is like so categorically different. And even like, I think it's important that it goes to, and yes, even his own life.
Yes.
As well. That it's like, okay, not just, I'm going to hate all these relationships and stuff that I've got, but like, I would so prefer Jesus. I would so like choose him that like my life itself seems not worth holding on to compared to him.
It's good. So on cross, we see in Luke 9:23, where he says, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. That cross is dying, like it's dying to ourselves, it's self-denial. And so carrying a cross then always led to death on a cross. No one carried a cross for fun. So this was a sacrifice of them making. And also another thing a commentator said, like, if someone took up his cross, he never came back. It was a one-way journey. So the dedication that you're making to following Jesus, it's like, if you choose to follow him, that's the course you've got to continue on.
Yeah. I like it.
I think it's also important whenever we look at the parable that precedes this, where he's like setting up this scenario where these invitations have been sent to this great banquet. And there's one invitation that's sent for the people to, and they're like, okay, this is what's going to happen. There's going to be this banquet. And then there's another one that's sent, and on that day, people, they can't do it because they've got too much going on. And then he sets it up to where he's inviting, the blind and the crippled and the poor. And it's like this really cool thing of like, man, this is like a gospel for everyone. And also like, it's an invitation that we need to be willing to accept, but also it's an invitation that Jesus is extending to us, this idea of salvation. But then if you just leave it at an invitation, it kind of leaves out the self-sacrifice part and what it takes to, and like what's required to follow Jesus. So I think it's cool how Luke puts these two things together here of it's not just an invitation. Like, yes, it is. And yes, accept it. But also we have to be willing to commit our lives and like know what we're getting into. Yeah. I think it's just really cool that Jesus doesn't just leave it at, hey, come follow me. And everything's going to be good. Right. Everything will be cool. You'll receive salvation. Like, he's very real with it's going to be hard. And also, like, you're going to have to commit your entire life to me.
Yeah, I highlighted in here. There's 3 times the phrase cannot be my disciple is used. So it's there in 26. If you don't hate father and mother, even your own life, you cannot be my disciple. If you don't bear your own cross, you cannot be my disciple. And then in 33, any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. I'm just like, man, I wonder how often, like just practically, I'm like, I don't think I share that message very often with people of like, hey, you can follow Jesus, but it's like, if you're not willing to give up everything, you can't, like you can't follow him.
Yeah. Yeah. We sometimes stop it at, or at least I think of it as like, Christians, believers, they're people who they just want to be better people, but you can't stop it there. These are like, being a believer is wholeheartedly committing yourself to following Jesus, which requires a lot of sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, so maybe at the end we can circle back to like, because it's definitely more communicators, it's more application oriented than exegesis. But I'd love to talk about like, okay, it's easy to talk about, maybe we should just do it now.
Sure.
Okay.
So it's easy to talk about like that following Jesus requires lots of sacrifice.
Yeah.
But then like, I think it's another thing to start saying, okay, so how does that practically work itself out now? Like, because in like for the majority of people, on a practical scale now, like saying they follow Jesus does not mean that they're like going to lose their jobs.
Yeah.
There are sometimes family relational impacts. Like what are the costs associated with following Jesus that you think of now?
I think for me, I think a lot of times of like some like selfish desires when it comes to, man, like somebody wrongs you and you want to get back at them, and it's like you have to die to self. Like that's not what we're called to do.
Yeah.
I think of like when I want to get angry about something, and just all those. At least for me, it's like that sacrifice of. It's really hard to do those things to not want revenge, to not get angry, to like it's like you have to shift your entire mindset and be different than like the way the world around you is. Even in like those little things with relationships and that's one thing for me.
Yeah. So kind of a death to sinful desires.
Yeah.
That like from a worldly standpoint, there's no reason like unless especially if it doesn't seem like it's hurting anybody.
Sure.
It's like you have every right to indulge yourself.
Yeah.
But from following Jesus, like you don't.
Right.
You don't have that right. Yeah, I think about like worldview stuff sometimes as far as like, how do I think about my world, and am I going to treat myself as the ultimate arbiter of truth? Like, am I going to ultimately say, hey, whatever I think is best is how the world works?
Right.
Or am I going to say, man, God, your authority is perfect, and I trust you even whenever it doesn't like line up with my sensibilities? I think that's one way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking of what you're saying, Nathan, and just how much in the world today the people only find what they want in Scripture. They don't necessarily find what they need. They want to pick the parts in there that make them feel good instead of like looking at the Bible as a whole and making it say what they want it to say.
Yeah. Okay, well, we don't have to linger there because, like I said, that's more communication and stuff. I was just like, as we're talking about suffering, it's like for them, for a lot of the people hearing Jesus, it would have been literally like willing to lay down their life, literally willing to lose their jobs and their families and stuff. Yeah. And so it's like, I don't want to ignore that. And I want to like do some work to translate it.
I feel like though too, like but the reflection portion, like if you were faced with that, would you be willing to do that today?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's good too.
All right, on to the parables. Illustrations.
Yeah, let's do it.
28 through 30? Or do you want to go all the way?
I'm good with reading it all. You?
We can.
Go for it.
Cool.
Let's do through 30 first.
Okay.
Never mind.
For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, "This man began to build and was not able to finish." I thought I was going to keep going.
Yeah. Okay, go through the end.
Okay. Or what king, going out to encounter another king in war, will not sit down first and deliberate whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? And if not, while the other is yet a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. So therefore, any of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple.
So I wanted it read together because I struggled with these two yesterday, like trying to understand them, and the way, I think it was you, Nathan, who you explained them both at the same time, so having them together explained made more sense to me than it being divided up.
Treating them as a pair.
Yes.
Because it's like they're both communicating the same thing. He's not trying to say two different things. He's giving
Right.
two examples of the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it seems like in broad strokes, it seems like the first one, you've got a guy wanting to build a tower. He needs to add up how much it's going to cost.
Yep.
And Jesus is saying like, you'd have to be, you'd have to be dumb to like, to just start without examining how many resources you have. Do I have the material resources, the time, the labor, the like, finances to be able to get this done? And if you start it and don't finish it, like people are going to point and laugh.
Right.
Like, yeah, he didn't do his homework first. Similarly, as a king, if you see an army coming at you and you don't even take stock of how many people you've got, and you just plunge headlong into war, like you're dumb. Like no king would do that. Or no wise king would do that. And so to me, it seems like the second one, the thing that's interesting about the second one is he introduces like two possible outcomes that are both beneficial. He's like, hey, a king is gonna look and see how many soldiers he's got. And if he realizes that he's got 10,000 and the other guy has 20,000, then he's not going to go to war, or he's going to like send a delegation and ask for peace. But the foolish king just plunges right into it.
Yep.
And so both of those to me, like in simplest terms, are reinforcing. So you've got the repetition of sit down and count the cost, sit down and deliberate. You have this idea of Jesus is saying to a crowd, like, hey, count the cost. Like, don't go into this with blind faith.
Right.
Don't go into this just like, just because you're excited or because everybody else is doing it, or because you like the miracles that I'm doing and stuff. He's like, it's not just going to be like roses and dandelions.
Like following Jesus is not a flippant decision to make, and like he's calling them to think about what it's going to cost you. I've just told you, if you don't hate your mother and your father, if you don't, the one who's not willing to bear their own cross, and like this is serious business, and you don't get to just say, hey, yeah, I follow Jesus, because you're going to find out that it's a little bit harder than you think it is. And if you're not sitting down and counting the cost, then you're like this king, you're like this guy who's building the tower. Like you are just going into it with no regard for what's going to happen. And you're going to get left with a tower that's absolutely worthless. Your whole army's going to get completely ran through. It's not going to be good.
For verse 33, I had a commentator say like that here he's talking about like giving away all of possessions and stewardship. And so we see that as like a major theme through Luke and Acts. So the renouncing it all like is to give up like authority or a declaration to the right to refuse. So anyways, like with that, I'm like, is there that hidden part of like possessions? Because I'm not reading possessions in this, or would that just be assumed of like the whole renouncing?
I would think, I'm trying to remember what there's a name for it, like poetically or linguistically, like whenever you argue from like, if the greatest is true, then the lesser things are true as well. So with him saying like, if you're willing to give up your entire life, even your own life, then I think everything else less than that is included in that. Yeah. So I think it would necessarily include your financial resources, your home, those kinds of things.
Which, I mean, would go with how Luke teaches as well.
And to the rich young ruler, he says, like, go sell everything that you have and give it to the poor. That's not always the gospel call. It's not always a poverty gospel. Even whenever we look in Acts 2, it's like people sold stuff whenever other people had need. It wasn't like expected or required that everyone was selling all of their stuff.
Right.
Sure.
So I like that the way you brought out, Stephanie, like this renounce is more like renounce your claim to it or your right to it. It's not like go sell everything, but anyway.
Yeah, nothing I have is mine. Like this, yeah.
We're talking some about like, okay, so the first of these parables has like build a tower.
Yeah.
We're talking a little bit about like, Why a tower, which I hadn't thought about much. Did you guys have reflections on that?
Only thing I had is like the lookout tower and the purpose of like guarding their vineyard, their land. So if you had a half-built tower, you're not going to be able to protect your home like you would think.
So a tower for them a lot of times would have been like a lookout tower
Yes.
on their property. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and with that, it's like that implies a certain amount of like wealth
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
that you own a vineyard or a field or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This isn't just a house. This is
Mhm.
something extra, something that isn't necessarily, not a necessity unless you
Mhm.
have these things. Yeah.
Right. And if it's only half built, like it's of no use.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Completely worthless.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Whenever I kept reading this, I kept going back to thinking about trying to build something for Brady and not reading the instructions, which is not the exact metaphor here, but like not making sure I had everything in front of me. And then you get halfway through it and you're like, this is not going well because I didn't make sure I had everything and I was not ready to build this.
I've never built anything from IKEA, but I've heard IKEA is the worst like instruction type
Yeah.
thing.
Mm.
I
Like
built a
they-
dresser. It took me 3 days.
Like they have like the worst instructions and like everything is in pieces.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, it was bad.
Oh, okay, good.
It was bad.
I mean,
I
not
like
good.
putting together like flat pack stuff like that.
Yeah. I
I
get enjoyment out of building
kinda like
things,
Legos. But I don't ever do. So I'm like, I think a funny application of this is like all those instructions tell you like step 1 is to go through everything and make
Yes.
sure like count all
Yes.
the pieces and make sure it's all there. It's like, I never do that.
no.
no. And
No.
then you get halfway through and you're like, oh, I needed
Yeah.
another screw.
Oh, there's one screw missing.
See, what normally happens is I start putting it together and then I end up walking away because I'm like, Justin, I've messed it up. And then he has to take it all apart and then
Yeah.
redo it again. Yeah, that's
I've-
normally what
I've been
happens.
there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But there's been times I've been successful sometimes. Maybe.
Or you get done and you're like, is there supposed to be an extra?
Yeah.
Where
Why
did this
do I
go?
have this?
Is
Yeah.
this crib going to collapse in
Yeah.
on my child?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll just try it.
Well, time will tell. Yeah, I'm sure that's what Jesus had in mind here.
Absolutely.
Man, I feel like, okay, so I'm thinking about, I'm going to take it into application land again because I feel like this is another one that's like, as we talked about, it's relatively easy to understand
Yep.
and
See,
difficult.
you guys say it was easy to. Like the parables were very confusing for me.
Okay, what do you think was what was confusing for you?
I just couldn't. I was like, I don't understand.
Mm.
Like I read it multiple times. I have hardly any notes for this section because I'm like, what is he saying here? And so that's why, again, I'm going back to I enjoyed you bringing it out and doing the pairs together or the pair together because it helped me understand it. So you're like, it's very simple, and I'm like, but it wasn't.
So in simple terms, like he's comparing this crowd that's following him without like stopping to count the cost. He's
and
comparing
examine
them
themselves
to
and examine
a person
the
who's
situation.
starting to build a tower without like counting the cost. And he's saying that like what you're getting ready to do to your lives is like build it halfway and then let it crumble.
Right.
Or you're getting ready to like send your army that has half as many people as you need into battle.
Yeah.
And he's saying, don't do that, which is like a huge turnoff to the crowd.
Yeah.
Because like if Jesus cared just about having, if he gauged his success by the popularity of how many people around him, like this is not a smart thing to say.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's so key to point out who he's talking to there and like really nail down the context of that because this isn't a one-on-one conversation with Peter.
Right.
He's talking to a crowd of people who are just following him, don't really know what they're getting themselves into. They're like, oh, I've heard Jesus is cool. Maybe he'll heal me. Maybe he'll do this.
Yeah.
And he's laying it down for them and not just giving them this pretty story of like, yeah, keep following me. And yeah, he's being bold and not beating around the bush, not sugarcoating it.
And then I think about like what we see happen in Acts and then in the early church and some of the most incredible testimonies and some of the like for the spread of the gospel, like some of the things that had the most impact were like people being martyred,
Yeah.
being willing to literally give their own life for Jesus.
Yeah.
And then especially once you got, you went through a time of like with Constantine, Christianity being in vogue and like popular and legal, and then going back into times of persecution, like the rate of apostatizing like went way up for people who would like turn from the faith. I'm just thinking about like, man, what does that do for the name of Jesus? Whenever you have people who, whenever the sword is to their throat, they're like, actually, no, I don't believe it. It's like, it feels like it almost undoes a lot of the work of the martyrs. And I'm just like, Jesus doesn't want those kind of people. He doesn't want the kind of people who are going to back away from it whenever it gets hard.
Yeah, that's so good. Man. Yeah, it just makes me think maybe even, and not that I don't want to, not to make it personal or throw anybody like under the bus, but just, you know, in your own life of thinking of people who you're like, you thought they were really strong Christians and then something happens and it feels like they completely back out and renounce it all. That was hurtful to me and is hurtful to people. And it makes you start to wonder like, okay, well, how good is
Was
this
any of this
stuff?
real?
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking about like, I wonder how much this plays in for like all the church leader failure we see
It's
today.
been so much.
It's been a lot.
Yeah. It's kind of heartbreaking. Not kind of, it is heartbreaking.
Yeah. And so I don't know. I'm like, maybe it's not fair to say that they didn't count the cost. Maybe it's a different cause that they didn't watch themselves. But like I do, especially whenever we talk about that, hating even your own life, like I would gladly give up my fame and reputation and platform and preferences and like sinful lifestyle and tendencies and hidden sin and stuff.
Yeah.
I would gladly give those things up for the sake of knowing Christ. It's like, I wonder how much that factors in to like moral failures in leaders, that they never adequately counted the cost.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Okay, one other thing. So let's put this in the context of invite. So this is talking about like, it's supposed to be an encouragement for us to be inviting people to follow Jesus, whether it's for the first time or to follow him more closely. How do you guys see this playing into that topic?
I think in part for me, it gives me like inspiration as we're going about like evangelizing to people, to be honest and not to give them just something to get them in the door. I think we can get too caught up in, we don't want to turn people off the gospel. We don't want to turn people away too soon. Like you want to make sure you hook them. Which there's something to that, but at the same time, like Jesus is being very real, and I think he wants us to be too. Of like, hey, there's an invitation into this life that Jesus has to offer, and it's full of joy and it's full of peace. But you're also gonna have to sacrifice a lot, and if you don't know that going into it, and if we're not telling people that, I think we're going to do them a disservice in the long run.
Yes.
That's good.
Yeah. So like there is a huge amount of sacrifice that happens with following Jesus, and you can see it more in other believers than some. And so like being honest about it is just really important. Like, but there is something great that comes with following Jesus, is you get a peace that surpasses all understanding. You have the presence of God who's always with you, who promises to never leave you or forsake you. And you don't understand what that means until you're in trials of seasons, like of that really hard moment when you feel like giving up and you can feel him close and you're like, okay, it's going to be all right. So.
Yeah. I think too, like, so invite is not just about like the first invitation or that invitation of faith, but it's also like inviting one another into deeper relationship with Jesus.
Yes.
And so I think about like, there are going to be times where we're talking with a brother or sister and they're going to say like, man, this sucks. This is too hard. Or like, I don't want to give this up. Like, why would I do this? Doesn't God want me to be happy? Or those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And it's like, to be able to say to them like, hey, following Jesus is not easy. Like it does require like dying to yourself.
Yeah.
It requires carrying your cross. And if you're not willing to do that, like Jesus has very like hard things to say to you.
Yeah.
But it's so worth it. So I think like there's an invitation to surrender and die to self.
Yeah.
For other believers too.
This is a heavy passage.
It is. I'm thinking about for us too. I'm just like, I wonder what, for the person who's doing the inviting to like, it can be really uncomfortable to put yourself out there to like, to engage a faith conversation, not knowing if you're going to get rejected, not knowing like, could this break this relationship? Are they going to think I'm dumb? Are they going to make fun of me? Are they, and for that, Jesus says to us like, that we need to love him more than we love even our own lives.
Yeah. Yeah. To be able to put that aside and to be okay with potentially someone, thinking negatively of you, thinking you're a goofball. Or,
right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any final thoughts for you guys?
No.
Okay.
Not I.
No, I think I'm good.
Okay. Yeah. I think I'm good too. I'm like, it is heavy and it's hard to hear. And I think that's intentional from Jesus.
Yeah.
And I just think about like Paul also saying that he counts all of his previous life as rubbish, as worthless compared to the surpassing wealth of knowing Christ. That like, I want for each of us to have that kind of experience, to press in to our relationships with Jesus to the place where we could say, like, genuinely looking someone in the eyes, like, hey, following Jesus is going to cost you everything, but you get so much more in return.
Yeah.
Like, it's so much better to have him than to not have him and have everything else. So it's like, I long for each of us. I want that more for myself, for everybody listening, for each of you guys. Like, how do we have that experience of, I want us to have that experience of like, Jesus is really worth it. So, okay. Well, thank you guys for joining us for Invite Week 3. I hope it's been kind of a sobering, reflective moment for you. And I hope it's also encouraging. I hope if you're going through a time that feels like kind of that's losing everything, laying down stuff, I hope that it's encouraging you to know that like Jesus told us it's supposed to feel like that. It's supposed to be like that, and that he's worth it. I hope if you've been finding yourself a little bit on the fence, that like this is one of those things that encourages you actually to say, okay, I'm in. Whatever it costs, Jesus, put me in. Thank you for listening. Thanks for your feedback. If you've got any questions or thoughts, stuff that you think we missed or whatever, like send it our way. warehouse@cornerstone.team. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks. Have an excellent week.
Peace out, Girl Scout. That's all I got. Yeah. I don't know. I'm going to change it up.
Bye.
Bye.